tonight from Normandy, France, in the shadow of global tensions, paying tribute to the soldiers of D-Day.
He said, "What did you do when you landed on the beach?" I said, "I got the hell off as quick as possible."
The veterans who did the fighting determined now to do the remembering.
The name liveth forevermore, so I made sure that I talk like I'm talking to Corporal Martin, Corporal Snape. Their names are still being told.
Thank you for your service.
What may be their final trips to the place that changed them forever.
An Israeli strike aimed at Hamas militants kills more civilians.
They want a ceasefire deal that doesn't necessarily end the war. And Hamas is very leery of that.
As many retailers focus online, a Canadian brand doubles down on bricks and mortar.
We feel we know the market and we listen to our clients.
Why Simon says expansion is the right move.
This is The National with Ian Hannah-Mansing and Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thank you for joining us. I'm here on Juno Beach. Behind me, Canada House, where the liberation of Western Europe from the Nazis began, seized by Canadian soldiers who stormed this beach exactly 80 years ago. A victory that came at a terrible cost. A local tradition here at this beach on this day is to go into the water at dusk and release flowers to mark the lives of the soldiers who plunged in, charged forward, but never made it past the beach. Today in Normandy, all those decades later, leaders honored the Allied veterans whose bravery altered humanity's deadliest war and helped reshape the world. But so few of those veterans are left, and their legacy may be more fragile now than ever. Looming over the day, a sense that the institutions and freedoms forged from victories on these beaches face rising, possibly perilous challenges. Margaret Evans begins our coverage.
An aerial dance in the skies above Normandy's beaches. World War II-era bombers and sleek modern formations sweeping the coastline in a mingling of past and present.
Arriving from the sea is the CC-132.
They were part of commemorations on all 5 D-Day beachheads, including Juno Beach, where the Canadians landed 80 years ago. Charles Davis was 22 when he hauled ammunition ashore 4 days after the initial assault. Today, he's 102. His favorite moment from the ceremony, meeting Prince William.
He said, "What did you do when you landed on the beach?" I said, "I got the hell off as quick as possible."
13 Second World War veterans from Canada are being honored.
Our way of life didn't happen by accident, and it won't continue without effort. Democracy is still under threat today.
That was a warning carried on the wind by world leaders, a reminder that there is war again in Europe.
The autocrats of the world are watching closely to see what happens in Ukraine, to see if we let this illegal aggression go unchecked. We cannot let that happen.
The historian Timothy Garton-Nash, whose father also landed on the beaches, says Western nations must not fail Ukraine.
So for me, one of the big meanings of this moment, this anniversary, is what are we going to do about the war that's going on right now? And are we actually going to have the same determination to help Ukraine win this war that we had 80 years ago?
Before leaving Juno Beach, the Canadian veterans made one more pilgrimage through the dunes and down to the water. For some, likely their last. Another place, though, where the past and present still mingle, as long as memories are kept alive.
So, Margaret, Biden and Trudeau referred to the war in Ukraine, but that wasn't the only concern hanging over this date.
No, Adrian, a lot of concern about elections. Voting is underway here and in other EU countries for the European Parliament. And there's an anticipated or expected rise in support in a number of countries for hard-right populist parties that support Russia, that are against the European Union. The EU, of course, was created after the Second World War in a desire to bind countries like Germany and France together in a community. And there are worries about elections in the United States and the potential return of a Trump presidency. Many European leaders, governments, the capitals across this continent are worried about the transatlantic link. They don't see Donald Trump as being supportive of it. That transatlantic link that we've been seeing in such strong display along these beaches over the past few days.
Margaret, thank you. King Charles spoke at a separate ceremony marking the contributions of British troops at Normandy.
Our nation and those which stood alongside us faced what my grandfather, King George VI, described as the supreme test.
So the King spoke at the Gold Beach Memorial, unveiled in 2021 and carved with the names of the more than 20,000 British soldiers who died at Normandy. Recently diagnosed with cancer and slowly returning to public duties, the King noted that it was his 7th D-Day event over the past 40 years. Well, the solemn commitment to remember this day that you heard from many here in France was echoed at Canada's National D-Day ceremony in Moncton, New Brunswick. Kayla Hounsell has that scene.
Stand at attention. Oh, dear.
At 100 years old, retired Sergeant Russell Kay says this day may be the last he stands at attention. As he gets ready, he reflects on the day he stormed Juno Beach.
We were still away out in the water when I knew what was going on. There was bombs, there was shelling. I waited and the same as the rest.
Kay joined the Canadian military 2 days after his 18th birthday. He went on to serve for 3 decades, becoming highly decorated. His son and grandson served in Afghanistan.
He's done everything he's supposed to do for his country, and he's done it and in spades. So I appreciate him each and every day.
At the age of 95, he went back to Juno Beach, and it all came flooding back. He couldn't make it this year. Instead, honored at Canada's signature ceremony.
I'm trying to speak in one way on behalf of those that didn't make it.
103-year-old Marion Arsenault was also honored.
Oh, it's wonderful. I never thought it would happen.
She wasn't overseas, rather in air traffic control in Halifax.
I worked in what they call a war room. It was very secret.
We are forever in your debt.
France presented Kay with its highest order of merit.
You served until the end of the war.
Kay says he appreciates each medal equally, and he has a strong message when it comes to the wars that continue to rage.
The lesson had never been learned. War don't pay. I don't care who wins or who loses. Everybody loses.
A stark warning and a final salute to a moment in time that defined his long life. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Moncton.
Of the once young Canadian soldiers who survived the carnage of this beach, there aren't many left. Their first-hand accounts of D-Day invaluable and still searing.
Do you remember what it sounded like to be standing?
Just a rumble, continuous rumble and smoke.
Everything happens at once. Just like a dream.
Was it slow like a dream?
No, fast. Everything is fast.
Did you have even 1 second to be afraid?
You're afraid all the time, but you don't realize it, you know.
You'll hear those stories in full a little later in the show. But for now, let's go back to Ian in Vancouver with the other big stories of the day. Ian?
Thanks, Adrian. We start in Gaza, where dozens were killed after an Israeli strike at a UN-run school. This is the scene at the compound in central Gaza. Israel says Hamas fighters were sheltering inside. Chris Brown on the devastation and the push to end the war.
Israel's military says the rooms in the school turned shelter where its missiles struck were hiding Hamas militants. But at the nearby hospital, many of the casualties were children with catastrophic injuries. Lots of rubble fell on my legs, Ahmad al-Makdabi said. My father was crushed to death. The head of the UN agency that used to run the school said up to 6,000 displaced people were sheltering there. It said it couldn't verify claims that militants were there as well, but Israel's military released images of some of the fighters it said it killed without mentioning civilian casualties.
We conducted the strike once our intelligence and surveillance indicated that there were no women or children inside the Hamas compound, inside those classrooms.
The U.S. said Israel needs to offer up a better explanation for why so many civilians were killed.
And we have made clear to the government of Israel that we expect them to do everything that they can to minimize civilian harm.
The ceasefire proposal released last Friday is being pushed hard by the Biden administration, but so far does not have firm yeses from either side.
They're fully aware of the kind of Israeli ambivalence with regard to the plan.
This analyst says Hamas wants a permanent end to the fighting in exchange for releasing Israeli hostages in the first phase of the deal, which Israel does not want to agree to.
They want to be able to operate more or less at will. So they want a ceasefire deal that doesn't necessarily end the war. And Hamas is very leery of that.
Canada, the UK, and more than a dozen other countries have issued a joint declaration saying now is the decisive time to make final compromises to close a deal. The fact that neither side has said an explicit no is keeping precarious hopes alive. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
A tense situation tonight at the McGill University campus in Montreal as police fired tear gas and pepper spray at pro-Palestinian protesters. Demonstrators have barricaded themselves inside an administration building, calling on the university to cut ties with Israel. Police were called in. They've now cleared the building. Video posted online by a student group shows police confronting students as they walked past. Police say they did make some arrests, but didn't specify how many. The pro-Palestinian encampment at the university, which began in April, has not been cleared. And breaking news in Toronto tonight, the union representing workers with Canada's largest transit system has reached a framework settlement with the TTC, putting the looming transit strike on hold. Workers have been without a deal since the end of March. Ithel Musa is live at the Sheraton Hotel where those contract talks are being held. And Ithel, this is great news for the 1.3 million TTC riders.
Yeah, indeed, Ian. There is definitely a sense of relief tonight in Toronto. As you mentioned, a framework settlement has been reached. That is the news that was brought to us by the union. They say that is putting a strike for now on hold. Their collective agreement expired on March 31st, and they had said without a new one, Toronto's buses, streetcars, and subways, they would all grind to a halt. And now, while some people were coming up with a plan B, perhaps walking to work, biking if that was possible. Others talking about perhaps taking taxis and ride shares to work. There was concern, particularly for Toronto's working class communities, many of whom travel very long distances to get to work, that they would be in peril. Many expressing worry and concern. I even spoke to one gentleman who said he was, worried about perhaps losing his job. But the union says a strike is not going to happen, and they are negotiating. Here's more of what they had to say tonight.
I think we've started the road for our members to get the value that they deserve and they're entitled to get. I think we've started to get the protections that we need to protect not just transit workers, protect transit. That's what we're calling out. The TTC is actually actively working against itself when it comes to delivering transit.
So, Ian, the transit system here in Toronto once considered an essential service, making striking impossible, but that decision was quashed by Ontario's top court, which recently upheld the workers' right to strike.
Ithel Musa reporting from downtown Toronto. Thank you. A break in a massive water pipe has created a series of problems in Calgary, at one point prompting an emergency alert and a boil water advisory for one area. And as Aaron Collins explains, the break is still having an impact throughout the city.
From the air, the problem's easy to spot. A busted water feeder main shutting down the Trans-Canada. So much water bubbling up, the road buckled. The broken pipe, one of Calgary's main sources of water.
You can literally drive a truck through the feeder main that has broken. If you are going by the site, you can see trailers that are parked there for the crews. Those trailers fit in this pipe.
The challenge now, finding precisely where the break happened and fixing it. Until that happens, some residents of this community relying on water wagons.
I got that alert at 6:20. Scared me. But yeah, so then I knew there was no water. And then I seen on Facebook that this was here.
Others scrambling to buy their own.
Generally, I think more people are probably going to be going to the superstore because it's bigger, but like the 7-Eleven there, they got a bunch of flats laid out, which is nice.
The break impacting plumbing at several schools in the area too.
Having no bathrooms, having to go outside and use those porta potties over there.
Have you managed to do that?
I'm holding it in. I'm not risking it.
This neighborhood remains under a boil water advisory, but residents remain upbeat.
We will manage. I have cold beer. It's not good for brushing your teeth, but...
The break also impacting water pressure, a potential problem for firefighters, prompting a citywide fire ban.
So while repair efforts continue here, the rest of the city is being asked to conserve water. Watering lawns, that's out. Showers, they need to be shortened, and washing clothes and dishes, that should be delayed. And those restrictions, they could be in place for days. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Calgary.
The questions and concerns continue since Monday's bombshell report that some MPs may have acted on behalf of foreign state actors. One was asked over and over today at a parliamentary committee, who are the MPs? Evan Dyer explains.
Government and opposition members sparred over whether the government should name the MPs who've allegedly acted on behalf of foreign governments.
Are you prepared to release those names, yes or no?
No.
Let's face it, Minister. I think if there were six Conservatives on that list and no other Liberals, we would have had the names. Let's be honest here.
Thank you, Mr. Caputo. Mr. Chair, I'm not going to violate the Security of Information Act and risk prosecution for a political stunt, and I think Mr. Caputo knows better.
The report makes clear that foreign actors have targeted more than one party, giving examples of Han Dong's Liberal nomination in Toronto and 2 Conservative leadership races. Canada's spy agency says it doesn't want the names out in public.
I think we have seen, the impact of the leaks and when classified information is released.
Government members said Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre could easily get the names himself by asking for a security clearance. All other party leaders have it, except Yves-François Blanchet of the Bloc, who's now announced he plans to get it. Conservatives say security clearance is a trap that would prevent them from speaking in public.
There's a proverbial muzzle based on what is learned in that briefing. Is that not right?
There are absolutely limits to what the leader of the opposition will be able to say.
But, says the spy master, he could use it for things like internal party decisions.
Someone that may not be allowed to run, may not be allowed to sit in a caucus because of the information, the classified information that has been used.
Bill C-70 would change the law in a way that might allow information like the names of those compromised MPs to be released in the future, even if it would normally violate privacy laws, as long as the public interest in knowing clearly outweighs the invasion of privacy. The government said today it wants to have that bill in place by the next election. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Ottawa.
As department store chains get smaller, there's one Canadian company that's set to expand.
We're very excited about these 2 new stores in Toronto.
But can it survive where others struggle?
I think the space is like haunted.
The EU election kicks off and voters may shift to the right.
I'd rather have an asylum deal, not a green deal.
The backlash against climate action.
And I speak with some of the men who 80 years ago today stormed this beach. What they saw, what they experienced, still etched in their minds.
17 kids that were lined up and shot in the back of their heads by the German. I'll never forget that. Bastards.
We're back in 2.
Now less than 3 meters away.
After a tricky start, Boeing's Starliner space capsule docked with the International Space Station at 1:34 Eastern Time Thursday. Astronauts Barry Butch Wilmore and Sunita Sunny Williams now safely aboard.
Butch and Sunny have made their arrival.
Later than originally planned due to some malfunctioning thrusters, but they got it done. A huge relief for Mission Control after yesterday's picture-perfect launch following several frustrating delays. The first successful docking meets a key NASA test for Boeing to compete against SpaceX, which has already been to the ISS more than 20 times and is now celebrating another milestone. Its giant reusable Starship rocket survived re-entry through the atmosphere Thursday, splashing down as planned in the Indian Ocean after its 4th test mission. The European Union's next parliament will be elected over the next 4 days, and it's expected to look a lot different. Parties from the political right are challenging the green wave that ushered in the last one. International climate correspondent Susan Ormiston is in the Netherlands, where voting is already underway.
Jostling for power in Europe, riding a potential surge to the right.
I'd rather have an asylum deal, not a green deal.
We caught up with Geert Wilders, leader of the Dutch far-right party, PVV.
What's your message to the West? I'm from Canada.
Well, the West is waking up. You see parties like mine growing and having increased popularity all over the European Union.
At a cafe in North Amsterdam, strong support for the PVV and closing borders.
Too much immigration to Holland, to Europa.
Another dividing line, green politics.
I drive a coach, international coach driver, and they want all the coaches out of Amsterdam. It's now also the green politics in Rotterdam.
The last EU elections ushered in a green wave, and out of that came the European Green Deal, a package of ambitious climate initiatives and regulations. José de Voogd is a political geographer.
Yeah, there's a huge group of society that for all different kinds of reasons feel left out of the worldview of the establishment.
Laura Kitts, an activist and singer, voted on the left, alarmed at the pushback peddled by the far right, she says, vowing to end climate hysteria.
Extremely worried. It's so important. We know that we have only a couple of years to halt the worst of climate change. And if we don't do that now, we'll be in massive, massive trouble.
Europe's Green Party knows they're in for a fight. Polls project it could be weakened in the parliament, perhaps significantly. In the final days, they're trying to whip up renewed enthusiasm.
And what you see now is that the far right is trying to pretend that all the problems of Europe are because of that. They always need a scapegoat, and the Green Deal is the scapegoat.
But Europe could be headed for a paler shade of green.
Susan, where else in these elections could we see a rise in the populist far-right parties?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at France, Germany, Italy, all with rising support for far-right and nationalist parties. And they're big countries, so they have a big chunk of the European Union Parliament. Exit polls out of the Netherlands tonight show that the PVV, the Nationalist Party, did make significant gains, but the Greens, with the support of the Labour, hung on to their support mostly. No official results, Ian, until Sunday night when all 27 countries have voted.
Susan Ormiston reporting in Amsterdam tonight. A retailer is defying the odds as it looks to expand.
The customer is evolving, the customer is changing, but the department store is not evolving with them.
But one Canadian company thinks it can set itself apart.
And we look back at the extraordinary feat of thousands of Canadian soldiers. They threw themselves into the fight in Normandy and changed the course of the Second World War.
We lost everything. I had nothing.
No weapon.
No weapon.
Their raw memories from that fateful day 80 years ago. Next.
For now, the Olympic rings are sitting at the base of the Eiffel Tower, but this Friday, they'll be mounted onto the Paris landmark as the countdown to the Games winds down. We're now just 50 days away from the opening ceremony. When department stores in Canada are in the news these days, it's usually because they're cutting back or even shutting down. But that's not the case for Quebec retailer Simons. Sophia Harris shows us why the company is expanding to 2 big locations in Toronto.
Luke Gillett wants to wear a pink suit to his upcoming wedding, so he came to Simons.
So why do you shop here?
I like supporting Canadian-owned businesses, so that's part of it, but the selection is great.
Simons is a Canadian success story. The Quebec-based retailer sells clothing and housewares at 17 stores across Canada. It's set to open 2 additional locations next year.
We're very excited about these 2 new stores in Toronto.
It's a bold move in a tricky market, plagued with rising costs, fickle customers, and giant online competitors.
We have a lot more choices as customers today. We have digital shopping. We have ultra-fast fashion players. Whether you agree with their practices or not, customers are shopping these websites.
Plus, Simons is taking over part of this ill-fated section of downtown Toronto's Eaton Centre, previously home to department stores Eaton's, then Sears, then Nordstrom, each of which shut down. And Simons' next-door neighbor will be the Bay, which has closed several locations.
The customer is evolving, the customer is changing, but the department store is not evolving with them.
Simons insists it's different. Sales grew over the past 2 years by 3%. The CEO says the retailer remains relevant by staying in touch with customers.
How do you know that in a year from now you won't be going out of business doing liquidation sales?
I guess you never know, right? The reality is we have to stay competitive. We feel we know the market and we listen to our clients.
Some downtown Toronto shoppers hope Simons gets it right.
I hope, but I think the space is like haunted.
Simon's got a lot of great brands. They have great prices. Yeah, I think they're gonna be the ones that stick around.
Simons thinks so, but in the fickle fashion market, ultimately the customer gets to decide.
Good, eh?
Sophia Harris, CBC News, Mississauga, Ontario.
If you're looking for that issue tonight, we have you covered. You can watch this week's conversation online on YouTube and cbcnews.ca/The National. But now Adrian joins us again from Normandy with the stories shaping our world.
Thanks, Ian. And tonight, they come from the Canadian veterans who lived them.
We remember your sacrifice. We remember your stories.
There were just 13 veterans on the beach for today's ceremony, only 4 of them from D-Day. So few left, we know their names, we know their stories, we recognize them by sight. Hearing from these men matters, and please do it while you can. So let's take a moment to listen to what 3 of them told us about fear, about bravery, all recounted as if it happened yesterday.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your service.
This is the captain. I'd like to welcome you aboard. This is a very special flight today. We have 11 veterans from World War II who are traveling with us.
With all the respect for them that can be mustered, the liberators are on a hard homecoming.
I'd like to thank you for your service.
Some of Canada's few remaining D-Day soldiers en route back to the Normandy beaches. Cared for every transatlantic mile. Treasured men by both Canada and France. Take a moment to hear them out.
This is in the area where we landed.
This is Jim Parks. He was one of the first on Juno Beach on June the 6th.
We saved the area all around.
Just shy of 100 years old, some memories are crystal clear.
2 nights before, they canceled for 1 day because of the weather. Then it was on.
What lingers for him about that dawn assault as his landing craft approached shore was how things didn't go exactly as planned.
The boat was disabled. Our carriers got overflowed with water and we had to swim. We were supposed to land right on the shore, but we couldn't.
When your craft was hit, what was it hit by?
We thought we'd hit by a mine or something, but fairly loud explosion. Because a lot of firing going on as we went in.
Jim was a Royal Winnipeg Rifle. his assignment, scheduled for 2 minutes before the full invasion, was to hit the beach right here, an advance unit.
We lost everything. I had nothing.
No weapon.
No weapon. The first guy I saw was mortally wounded, a Corporal Scaife. So I took his helmet, I took his grenades, and I took his Sten gun.
Yeah.
So
Notice something there about Jim's recollection of the soldier whose gear he took? He named Corporal Scaife, says he tries to say the names of the dead as often as he can.
That's Billy Hood. He was killed the 8th of June.
And he tried to save his friends.
We pulled a few people out of the water. The tanks were coming in too. They'd be run over by the tanks. Even if they're wounded, they'd be finished. So he couldn't see who they're running over. Yeah.
Did you have even 1 second to be afraid?
You're afraid all the time, but you don't realize it. You want to get cover away from the firing, so we got into the sandbank and waited for the other people to come in.
Other people like George Couture. He too was a Royal Winnipeg Rifle.
When did it start to get louder? When did it start to feel like something was about to happen?
When we're about 20 miles offshore. Hell breaks loose, you could hear the guns going off.
Almost right away, he saw death. Men crushed between ships and landing crafts.
And that was pitiful to see. I've seen lots of men, they died before they got from one ship to the other. The sea was rough. They'd lose their hold on the scramble net, and they'd either fall down onto the smaller boat below or in between the boats.
So not even dying from enemy fire,
No,
just the danger of doing that.
There were quite a few. Must have been terrified. We were watching all this.
George, the rifleman, was in the second wave of troops just after Jim, who was heading inland. This is where George's unit landed. At the same time, Bill Wilson of the Navy was watching all this unfold from HMCS Ottawa II, right here.
Do you remember how you felt watching that?
In awe. In awe. It's never been seen before in the history of man. I don't think any of us had breakfast that morning. And we just stood there watching.
Do you remember what it sounded like?
Just a rumble. Continuous rumble and smoke.
The people that were shot or killed were lying in the water. It must have been phosphorus grenades or something they used on them. When they come up out of the water, it'd light up. They're on fire. Scare the heck out of you.
And so as you get closer to shore and it's your turn to go ashore, what was that like?
The Germans opened fire and then everything happens at once. Just like a dream.
Was it slow like a dream?
No, fast. Everything is fast.
I don't understand how you were able to put 1 foot in front of the other. Is that just the training, or are you built different?
You're always trained to move forward and take cover, do what you had to do.
What is it about you that made you survive, do you think?
Oh, the luck of the draw. I got buried in a trench a couple of times, and I got blown through a window, and I lost most of my hearing, and I got shrapnel in different parts of my legs. And the time I got blown through a window, the shell exploded behind me and blew me in.
See, the Germans were back about 10 miles.
George Couture has a memory of seeing German soldiers being taken prisoner by the Canadians, then having the tables turned as the Nazis grabbed him.
They just hid behind that railroad track with a big gun, and as soon as they seen a carrier come up over the hump, they opened up and blew. I remember flying through the air, and the Germans were just over on the other side. They come over the railroad track and captured us. There's 2 boys who were laying on the ground, weren't moving at all, and the German made me pick them up, and then he shot them. And then I thought, I'm going to be next.
Time sometimes moved fast, sometimes crawled. The Nazi soldiers put George and the other Canadian prisoners of war on a death march across Europe to Poland for nearly a year.
We marched thousands of miles. I forget even the names of places.
So for you, after 10 months, how did you become free? What happened?
The Germans just left us. Next morning, British tanks come roaring into the place, right through the barbed wire. A good sight to see.
In the end, these Canadians emerged mostly all in one piece. Different, though. All of them a bit different.
I lost 2 friends. One 5 doors away from me. I grew up with him.
All of them vowing to remember and talk about the pals they lost.
Jack was with the Port Garry horse tanks, and he died July 7th or 8th. Jesus Christ. They're still there.
They're still here with you.
Oh, yeah, yeah. There aren't anybody left to remember him. His parents, his sister's gone, his brother's gone. They're all gone.
It's amazing to me that you remember all these names so well.
Well, the name liveth forevermore, so I made sure when I talk, like I'm talking to you, Corporal Martin, Corporal Scaife. Their names are still being told. They're buried in Benny Samir, but I'm telling you the names right now.
It's a way of keeping them alive.
Yeah, the name liveth forevermore. That's right in the graveyard. You've seen it there, right? The name liveth forevermore.
What's really important for you to do when you go there this time?
One last time, visit the graveyard and the Abbey. I'm from Winnipeg, and they're all Winnipeg Rifles. Lost 17 kids that were lined up and shot in the back of their heads by the Germans. I'll never forget that. Bastards.
And so, finally, a moment. His last, he knows, with all the graves of those young men. To see these men here now is to respect what a toll on the heart it must take to return to Normandy. But driven by duty, as even the youngest of men, they know where they need to be right now. And they just have to trust that Canada and France will always stand for them.
As we reflect on the Second World War and the role these men played in it, it was not lost on the crowds here in Normandy that Europe is the site of another deadly invasion, especially with Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelenskyy in attendance.
The Ukrainian Prime Minister is busy fighting right now. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're the savior of the people. Here's my eyes. Got a picture.
Yeah, you want a picture?
My hero.
No, you are our hero.
My hero.
A pretty touching moment during the International D-Day ceremony today when an American veteran embraced the Ukrainian president.
I pray for you.
Stay with us.
Thanks so much. 80 years ago, they lost Ukraine.
There are no words to describe the immensity of the debt we owe you.
Many of the people who marked this D-Day have been here before. The awe and history of the moment, the rhythms of ceremony, familiar.
It's the highest honor to be able to salute you here in Normandy.
But there's also a feeling here that something has definitely changed. Noah, Ayed, nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
You and I were both here in 2019 for the 75th anniversary, and looking at what we saw today. A lot is the same in terms of the ceremony, but a lot feels very, very different. And I'm just curious, as you were amongst the crowd today, what struck you the differences in tone and feel?
I don't know if you felt this, Adrian, but to me it felt like a farewell. It felt like we were marking the loss of something, like we were about to lose something. And it really, for me, came home with those scenes at the end, those poignant scenes of the 3 leaders, you know, Prince of Wales, Justin Trudeau, and the Prime Minister of France, you know, spending all that time and lingering with the veterans, almost saying goodbye to them, shaking their hands and hearing their stories.
And You know, as you say that, too, I think about some of the ceremonies that were happening all along the beach. And people are so aware of the era we're in now, right? That there's been so much conflict. This is not a world without war. And having spoken to some of the veterans, which I know you did as well, I'm curious what you took from them about this moment in time.
Yeah, there was kind of a dual message. One we're accustomed to hearing, which is, don't forget the sacrifices. Don't forget a world like this takes a lot of effort, not only to make, but also to maintain. And the second thing that I heard, Adrian, is that, you know, perhaps we should look at the past full of wars and try to think of other ways to solve humans' differences of opinion. I definitely heard that message more than once from the veterans. Yeah.
And those men have, I mean, they have so many stories still. We've also talked a lot about women and the contribution of women in the Second World War. I met a lot of the code breakers, Elsa Lessard, Mary Owen, these people who contributed so much. But you told the story at the 75th anniversary about a woman who was a spy, an agent. And I think we have a little bit of that story. You and producer Steph Genzer dug up this story, spent some time with it, and shared it with us. Let's have a little look.
Her code name was Agent Blanche. Once she landed in German-occupied France, her identity was Suzanne Bonvie. But she was a British agent, a courier, and an explosives expert. Her main task? To quietly help the French resistance to sabotage German efforts.
So now that you hear that, I want to hear more. Can you share a little bit more about her?
Well, on top of first helping train members of the resistance, later she also helped prevent German forces or Nazi forces from reaching Normandy when the Allied forces had landed. And then once her area was liberated, she actually helped gather information for the Americans on the ground by traveling between the lines. And on top of all that, Adrian, after France is liberated, she's married to a French-Canadian soldier. She takes off and travels across continents to make a new home in Canada and raises a whole new generation of Canadians, 6 children she brought to the world.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So now if we look ahead to the anniversary 5 years from now, obviously it's going to look different. One thing we've been talking to people about is, what is the secret sauce? What is it that we need to do to keep that heartbeat of memory alive? What's your instinct on that?
I think it's what I saw today at the ceremony. It was 4,000 people. 800 of them were high school students. They were young. And actually, some of the veterans talked about this too. The key will be for those students, those younger people, to carry those stories forward. Because also, as this generation passes on, there are stories that they haven't told. And they might be contained in papers or in recordings or in other ways of telling stories. And that next generation will have to tell those stories.
Okay, that is a good point. So let's end on that one, because every time someone comes here, someone like me, someone like you, they learn something that they didn't know before. And sometimes stories are unearthed by the very sand itself. Did you learn something this time that you didn't know before?
You know what? Every time I come here, I learn something new. Today, I learned how much young people know about the stories of their great-grandfathers. But I'll tell you one story I really think needs to be told. Is other members of the Special Operations Executive, like Sonia, you know, former University of Toronto students, young Quebecers who died doing the work they did. They died in places far away from Canada. We don't know their stories, we should.
And so much of it was kept secret for so long.
Absolutely.
Nala Ayed, always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Great to see you. Thank you.
Next, a look back at the commemoration to honor those who bravely stormed Juno Beach.
It's hard to explain. A feeling, you have to feel it.
We remember their sacrifice in our moment. As we say goodnight to you from Juno Beach, a final glimpse of what it was like to be back in this critical place where thousands of Canadian soldiers fought and sacrificed so much. So their bravery, their valor, honored 80 years later.
On this day, 80 years ago, more than 14,000 Canadians landed at Juno Beach.
It is almost impossible to grasp the courage it would have taken to run into the fury of battle that very day.
Well, I tell you, I was quite scared.
We knew that some of us were going to die.
You're thinking about your folks at home, you're thinking about the friends you're with, and you just wonder.
Brave Canadians like you sacrificed everything for our freedom.
Your father was a part of the regiment. I want to get your thoughts on what he would think of today's events.
He'd be really proud of the liberty that he brought. Sorry.
It's hard to explain a feeling. You have to feel it.
104 years. Very nostalgic. He says it's like a dream he's going to wake up from.
These soldiers had friends and family. They had lives and jobs before the war started. We remember your sacrifice. We remember your stories.
It was an honor to be there and watch that this morning, an honor to meet the veterans, an honor to be standing here on Juno Beach in front of Canada House right now. Thank you for being with us. I'm Adrienne Arsenault on Juno Beach. Take care.